Happy Memorial Day weekend. The weather could be a little bit nicer, but I know we got a lot of folks in and out on our group. I certainly want to welcome any visitors we have with us this morning. We'll be studying this morning, kind of starting in chapter 6, Matthew chapter 6. Kind of as we ended last week, we kind of went really quickly through the culmination of kind of what that meant and kind of what Jesus is really getting to at the heart of chapter 5. But I want to kind of quickly kind of bring us to where we've been so far in this lesson, in the Sermon on the Mount. We started off in the beginning of chapter 5 with the Beatitudes and really kind of Jesus kind of highlighting these different character qualities that people must have to become truly what kingdom citizens are. And then we saw, it was a little bit of kind of like, it's a little bit kind of like theoretical, right? These are things you should do, is how you should act. And then he really kind of gets into like, and then do them. Be salt, be light. Influence through your good works, and then glorify God in doing so. Last week we really talked about a new standard, right? The true righteousness is not purely this external obedience, but it also goes to our heart. God is after a different quality, a different kind of righteousness, not just who we are and what we do, but truly our heart behind that. The why we do it, the how we do it, the impact that we have. And I think now we really see in this transition, it also again kind of reinforces that same concept. Jesus is now really kind of honing in on some of the religious practices that would become commonplace in the Jewish religion and kind of everyday life of Jewish life. He's like, it's not just what you do, but ultimately why you do it. And the motive behind that. Are we really seeking attention from others? Or are we serving God? I think that's kind of the main emphasis that I want us to look at this morning as we start here in chapter 6. So I'm going to start off. I'm going to read the first verse, and we'll kind of dig in a little bit, and then we'll add a little bit more here ongoing. So he starts there in verse 6. It says, "Beware of practicing your righteousness before others, in order to be seen by them, for you will have no reward from your Father who is in heaven." So we get to kind of this first statement of beware. But I think it's one of these things. It's like, beware of practicing your righteousness before others, and they might be seen by them, for you will have your reward from your Father who is in heaven. But I think what I want us to not lose sight of is we are supposed to be righteous. I think that's very clear. We just looked at that. We are supposed to have a higher level of righteousness than the scribes and the Pharisees. I want to talk about this here too, is we are supposed to be examples to others, right? We are supposed to be salt and light. But I think what we are not supposed to be, right, and this prohibition, our motive should not be, I'm going to be righteous so that others can see what I'm doing and glorify me. I think that's the key, right? So turn over. Let's talk about righteousness a little bit. Let's turn over to 1 John chapter 2. 1 John 2 and verse 29, if you know that he is righteous, you may be sure that everyone who practices righteousness has been born of him, right? So this is how we know we are God's, right? We show the righteousness. We are showing ourselves to be children of God by doing these things. It's like those words, practice righteousness, are the same words we saw back in chapter 6 or Matthew chapter 6 and verse 1. Beware of practicing your righteousness before others. Here John is saying that's how we are known to be children of God. Skip down to verse 7 in chapter 3. Little children, let no one deceive you. Whoever practices righteousness is righteous as he is righteous. And then finally, verse 10, by this it is evident who are the children of God and who are the children of the devil. Whoever does not practice righteousness is not of God, nor is the one who does not love his brother. So I think it really gets into, though, truly what is our motivations. So I want us to spend a little bit of time, though, in kind of this contrast. So we saw in the previous chapter, right, we are to let our light shine before men, but then Jesus comes right back and says, do not practice to be seen. How do we reconcile those two things together? What is Jesus trying to kind of emphasize in kind of putting these things kind of back to back like this? Jesse?
There's kind of this balance that you want to be seen, you don't want to be embarrassed. I think that's kind of what Jesus is getting at. He talks about with the light, we don't want to hide what we have. But we're not trying to say like, hey, look at me, look at me, look at me. Like, there's this kind of nuance to it that
Right.
we shouldn't be embarrassed of who we are and what we do.
Yeah. I see another hand over here.
The other unlearned distinction is that we're not supposed to be shining the light on ourselves. We're supposed to be shining the light on Christ.
Right.
We're not showing off our lights.
I think we're going to see in kind of very three distinct kind of examples exactly that. Norma?
And 11 is too, that with our heart, to examine our hearts to be, that it would be coming from our heart, and not to be prideful about it, not to be coming from wrong motives.
Yeah. I think this is where I think we got to really kind of drill into kind of what is driving our actions. And I think in the First John passages, we want to be known by what we do. We need to be an example to the world around us on what it means to be God's children. But if the motivation behind that is like, hey, you are doing such a great job, or what drives, I'm like, I'm going to do this and not that, it becomes this kind of, look at what I'm doing. And I think we're going to see here in these passages kind of what had kind of happened and how they kind of got there. Let's see. I wanted to read this quote. This is from Paul Earnhardt, and he has a kind of a collection of sermons all about the Sermon on the Mount. And as I was reading kind of the one on this section, I really wanted to kind of call this out, and I think it really highlights this. This newly stated principle may, at first, seem to be at odds with Jesus' earlier teachings, charged to let your light shine before men. But no real contradiction exists. There's a world of difference between doing good so as to reflect honor upon the God who made such goodness possible, and doing good as to bring honor upon oneself. It is not being seen of men that concerns the Savior, but the desire to be seen by them. It may be unnecessary to state it, but the real issue here is not whether to please God or please men. That is a real problem. But whether to please God or to please ourselves. I think that's really the crux of that, and I felt like that was a really good way of framing that up. It's like we do need to be good people. We do need to show the world around us, but our motives behind it should be in an attitude of pleasing God, not pleasing ourselves. And so I think we see these three examples here. I'm going to read them for us. We see these three examples, and I think as we read these things, I want us to kind of think about what is our motivation? Because it's important, we need to monitor our motivation in our worship and in our service to God. And in what ways might we be kind of tempted to perform those righteous acts? And I think those are the things I want us to kind of look at as we kind of drill into this morning. So I think first let's look at the kind of the three individual warnings. So chapter 6, verse 2. Then when you give to the needy, sound no trumpet before you, as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and in the streets, that you may be praised by others. Truly I say to you, they have received their reward. Chapter 6, verse 5. When you pray, you must not be like the hypocrites, for they love to stand in the synagogues and the street corners, that they may be seen by others. And then verse 16, and when you fast, do not look gloomy like the hypocrites, for they disfigure their faces, that their fasting may be seen by others. So Jesus really kind of in these three different elements is don't worship to be seen by others. And in all of them, then he says, truly, if that's your intent, if that's how you're going to progress, he says, truly, they have received their reward. If the goal of their worship is to be seen by others, then yep, you've accomplished that objective. And then we see these individual instructions on how we must do it instead. Verse 3 there says, but when you give to the needy, do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, so that your giving may be in secret. Verse 6, when you pray, go into your room and shut the door and pray to your Father who is in secret. In verse 17, when you fast, anoint your head, wash your face, that your fasting may not be seen by others, but by your Father who is in secret. And we see these, and your Father who sees you in secret will reward you. I think with each of these examples, Jesus is not condemning these kind of public acts of worship. What he is condemning, though, is the bad motives, right? In every one of these, it is some level of recognition before other people. And the want to be praised by other people, say, oh, look at how much they're giving. Oh, wow. Look at that great person. They're praying for so long, and they're praying with such fervency, you can just see it. Or this idea they're fasting, they must be so dedicated to this, because just look at what they look like. So I think as we kind of then now kind of go to each one of these and dig in a little bit further, I want to kind of look at kind of what was the norm, what was kind of going on at the time. What was Jesus really truly kind of calling out about what not to do, and then kind of what does it look like to do it the way Jesus would ask us to do it. Any comments right now, Rob?
So I think
there's probably a lot of Pharisaical, we use the word Pharisaical, there's a lot of Pharisaical worship going on. We read in Matthew, the 23rd chapter, some of the practices of the Pharisees. And, that's where Jesus says that they're whitewashed tombs. And he calls them hypocrites a number of times there. And I think that's probably what he's addressing, that this attitude of, hey, I'm great because look what I'm doing. And, I think we all kind of, I think Jesse kind of started down this path. I think it's right. We all kind of struggle with this at times. I want to be doing what's right before God. I want to be worshiping him the way he wants me to. But, and you said it too, what is our motivation? What's our motivation? And so the perfect example, I think, of to kind of think about this in my life is how do I feel and how do I practice praying when I'm at a restaurant with my family? I could do that wrong. I could make a pretty big production about it, and probably know that if I want to be heard, I can be heard, and speak loudly enough. We try not to do that. We kind of all lean in and we say a prayer together, and everybody's leaning in a little bit so that I don't have to be loud. Do people see that sometimes? Maybe sometimes. I think it's pretty innocuous, and a lot of times people don't, and that's fine. But I don't want, especially in setting an example for the kids and the grandkids, I don't want to not do that because I want to, kind of be like Daniel. This is part of our practice, and this is what we do every day, whether or not people can see us. And I like what you said, that what truly is our motivation. And I think we need to examine it. I think we need to examine it, re-examine it, think about it, and just recognize that our only motivation should be to glorify God.
I think it's interesting too. I think a really close second though is our example, especially to those our families.
Right.
I think that's. I think it is in all three of these. They are teaching elements that we should be doing to our children, and kind of how these things come to life. And I think it's easy to also kind of maybe skip over them. Oh, it's too hard at this time. But I think what we're going to see is this. Jesus doesn't say maybe if. On all of these, he says when you give, when you pray, when you fast. Almost kind of like saying it's an expectation.
It kind of relates to what I was thinking about, that if you are righteous, it's going to be noticed by the people that you actually have relationships with, that you actually interact with, as opposed to like this idea of playing righteousness, where you're putting on a facade that anyone who passes by can look at you and go, that guy's righteous, where in
Right.
reality, digging deeper, they're not.
Yeah, facade is Katie.
In my elementary school, there was a sign that said character is who you are when no one's watching. So we kind of have this like built-in, like a litmus test of, am I only praying, am I only worshiping, am I only acting righteous when I can be viewed? Or am I also, praying fervently when no one can see me? I think it's just something that I'm engaged in that also when we can't be seen.
Is there another hand over here? Dave?
I was thinking about this and how, in all of these studies that we've followed in the Sermon on the Mount, what Jesus is after is people's hearts, and what man is after is glory from one another. And which, we can come to even this worship assembly now, and in our minds, desire to be fed, but then it can mutate into a demand to be fed, as opposed to how can I contribute? I'm here for a purpose, I'm part of the body. Where am I supporting it? Or am I simply demanding everybody else to be the hand to support me?
When you give, again, I kind of called it out already. It's not if you give, but it's interesting. Jesus in all these, it says when you, whatever. So I think so in the first century, the reality was this was really needed, right? There wasn't a social safety net. This was a part of their everyday life. If you want to look at this a little bit deeper, I don't have a lot of time to get into it, but look back in Deuteronomy chapter 15 is a really good example of in God's law, kind of what his expectation was, right? And it gets into the year of Jubilee especially. But there's this cancellation of debts in verse 1. And it gets into kind of like taking care of others and making sure you're not lending and doing all the things like that. But ultimately, what he says is the why behind it is that there be no poor among you. They were supposed to take care of their own. They were supposed to ensure that their brethren, the people of the chosen nation of Israel, were taken care of. And as they kind of move into this land, they were to establish this ways of living so that there is no poor. And we kind of look at, all right, what did that look like in the first century, right? There was a whole different kind of thing going on, and that some of those elements from the old law kind of seemingly kind of evaporated, but there was a way of taking care of others. So there were boxes put up in the synagogues and in temples that were areas where they were to collect these funds that then they could be dispersed out. The giving of alms was something that was normally done. In fact, I was reading, it's interesting how Jesus says, hey, don't let the kind of the trumpets play before you. That may be a little bit of a kind of a hyperbole there, but it's interesting as some of the people that I was reading, some of the boxes were kind of like a funnel effect, and they didn't have checks and dollar bills, right? So you have coinage that you're then throwing in this kind of funnel-shaped device, and the more you throw in, the bigger the noise was. So you bring up your box, and everyone can hear, wow, that took a long time for that to all kind of settle in. So that may be some of what Jesus was kind of saying is like, hey, don't do these things to be noticed by others. It's interesting. Jesus says, don't let your left hand know what you're doing. It's interesting. So he first says, hey, don't do this to be noticed by others. But then he calls out, he's like, don't even let your left hand know what you're doing. Why might he kind of say that? Sometimes I think we get even in our own self.
Yeah, just to guard our own hearts, and I think like if we want even just a little recognition, sometimes that starts to spiral, and
Yeah.
so it's just like a complete prohibition on looking for others to notice you.
Yeah, look what I did. Even our own internal pride.
Yeah, took away what I was gonna say. I think sometimes we are double-minded. We know what the right thing to do is, we take the step, and we help somebody out, even a member of the church. I know Linda and I have been in a situation before where, wanted to help someone, and I don't even remember what it was, but I remember after doing whatever we did to try to help someone, I wanted that person to say something to me so that I know that they received what was intended. And then they never said anything. And, Linda and I struggled, had this, would you say something? No, we don't want to say anything. I just kept saying, that will ruin the whole thing if we say something. It'll just ruin any good that was accrued. So we didn't, and they didn't, and that was fine. And I think you just got to get past that. And for me, that was a struggle because I wanted some kind of acknowledgement. So I guess for me, I had to come up with an attitude that no, I don't need any acknowledgement. God tells me right here, God sees these things, and that's who I'm really trying to please anyway.
Yeah. Luke?
This kind of gives me the idea of like what the opposite of this would be. The opposite of this would be like having your KPIs, your key performance indicators, or something like that.
Time for the performance review at the end of the day, right? Yeah. Here's all the wonderful things I've done this year. Check, check,
God
check.
was angry when David
Yeah.
took the census.
Right.
It's kind of similar to that.
It's interesting, the passage there in Matthew chapter 25, right? This judgment scene of like, hey, you didn't do this, right? But it's interesting in verse 37, the righteous person says, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you drink? And when did we see a stranger and welcome you naked in clothing? When did we see you sick? And the king will answer, truly I say to you, as you did it to one of the least of these and brothers, so you did it to me. So it's even this kind of like, this righteous person kind of like, I don't know when I did these things necessarily. I didn't purposefully do them to be kind of accounted for. It's in secret, and it's not just in secret to those around about us, but I think it's even our own personal motives that we need to kind of keep those things in check. I think Wilson Adams in his book on the Sermon on the Mount kind of said this. He's like, a good rule of thumb to remember when it comes to our faith and our worship, when tempted to show it off, we should probably conceal it. When tempted to conceal it, as in like hide our Christianity, we better show it off. That's an interesting way of kind of putting it there. It's like we are often tempted to kind of like, this is the wrong crowd. I don't want to be really noticed by a lot of people. But when it's the right crowd, it's like, it's easy to kind of get that attitude of, look at what I did. I think it's also kind of, we should be kind of ready to give to those in need. If you think about 2 Corinthians chapter 9, right, this purposing in our heart to be cheerful givers, there should be some kind of element of kind of a recognition of like, I should be kind of thinking about when and how I should be able to give. It should be something that we can do right away, and again, with the right motives, and not to be praised by others, but by praise by God. We see several different examples here. We have in Mark chapter 12, the widow who is giving the last of everything. Paul tells Timothy that we need to have a content heart. I think contentment in what we have is really an attitude that we need to really manage, because if we're not content with what we have, we're going to be less willing to give to others. In that 2 Corinthians chapter 9, we should be cheerful givers. The second one is when you pray. When you pray as children of God, do we seek the time to truly communicate with God? I think we see Jesus says not to do it to be seen by others. I think what the example there is, hey, they're on the corner, they're doing a lot of things, and they're really kind of saying, hey, what did I do? What can I be seen? I think it's something that we should really focus on. It's not to purely check a box. I think it's something that, okay, I need to pray. Let me see how quickly I can get this done. Check, done, ready to go, move on. I want to spend a little bit of time on then what does it mean to pray? I think we see Jesus is saying, hey, this is not a show. This is not designed to make others marvel on how religious you are. Don't use these kind of empty phrases or many words that just kind of have no kind of meaning behind them. That's not to say that we can't repeat, right? We see examples in the Bible where in Luke chapter 18, we see the persistent widow that's kind of praying often and ongoing. We see even Jesus in the garden, right? We see him praying. It says in Matthew chapter 26, I think 43, he prays the same words over again for the third time. But I think this is not this idea of, and I think in the world around us, and even this kind of the model prayer that we have here in Matthew chapter 6, people will use that to like, all right, I prayed because I recited this prayer. That's not what Jesus is asking us to do. It's not what he's demanding of our lives. But I think really when we do pray, he's saying this is what you should do. Our focus should be, first of all, on our Father. It's interesting. Pray to your Father who is in secret, and your Father who sees you in secret real reward to you. He says in verse 8, do not be like the Gentiles, for your Father knows what you need before you ask of them. And then we see pray like this, our Father who is in heaven, and this hyper focus on our Father and the relationship that's kind of intrinsic in that recognition of our Father. It builds in this level of reverence right away, right? Our Heavenly Father. In verse 9, hallowed be your name. We see then, as God is not just our Father, but He is also the creator and the King of the entire universe. The reverence due Him is beyond probably what we can even imagine. And that needs to be the focus of our approach to God and this communication pathway. It needs to be one of pure reverence. And these also things, we need to get our priorities right? We think about this, what He is asking us to do, right? We see in this model prayer, it says, your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. I think the idea here is because God is who He is, we should pray for the fulfillment of His things and His ways much more before we start praying for what I want and what I need. This idea of thy will be done, His kingdom is advancing. Because guess what? We need to put our trust in Him, that He has our best interest in mind as well. We see there in 1 John chapter 5, it says that if we ask anything according to His will, He will grant us there. It's interesting too, even Jesus in the garden puts everything up to not my will be done, but thy will be done. We need to go to God reverently and humbly and say, here is our prayer, that we need your will to be done. I think we then see this ask for provision for ourselves. And it's interesting as we think about what the model prayer here is. It's not saying, hey, God, I need all these things, but truly, and this says, give us this day our daily bread. There's this idea of immediate provision, but a provision of what I need, not this kind of expansive, this list of things that I need in my life. Proverbs chapter 30 and verses 8 and 9 says, feed me with the food that is needful for me, lest I be full and deny you and say, who is the Lord? Or lest I be poor and steal and profane the name of the Lord. This idea of giving us the provision that we need, but sometimes it's really easy for us to kind of get into this, I need this. I want this. I want these blessings. I want this to happen in my life. I need these things to happen to occur. And I think it's really, our priorities need to be first God's things first, and then our needs, maybe not necessarily just our wants. And then finally, the biggest provision that we do need. And Jesus spends a little bit more time on this. He's like, forgive my sins and help me not to sin, right? I think this is the idea too, is I need forgiveness because I've also been forgiven. I need help because this evil one is tugging and pulling at me. So I think it's what does this then look like in our own lives? Are we thoughtful in our prayers? I think to the point of, I think the how often do we pray? Do we use kind of the example of Daniel, who spent time daily, and actually it was known that he spent time daily in prayer, even when there was a reason not to. He still dedicated time in his life to pray regularly? Do we focus on the spiritual aspect of our prayers? Do we focus on his will, our obedience towards him, for our soul and the souls of others? I think that's where I see it's really easy to kind of click into the list of the things that I need and I want. And there are very reasonable things that we need to pray for. But I think if that becomes the pure focus of our prayers, we skip over the spiritual nature. I think, are we praying for our own soul? Are we praying for when we need to live a life differently than we are doing today? Are we asking for the guidance to make those doors open or close with the mindset not it's what I need or what I want to advance my career or advance my life, but it's what I need to grow my spiritual aspect before we ask our physical needs. It's interesting too, as you look through the book of Acts, how many times does the early church devote themselves to prayer? You see that many times when there's an issue, when there's a challenge before them, they devote themselves to prayer. When there's a decision that they need to make, they devote themselves to prayer. Where there's sending people out before they go, they devote themselves to prayer. I think that teaches us a lot, that devotion to prayer is something that's easy for us to kind of skip over. Forgiveness, this is really the second time. There's a little bit of kind of extra credit here on this, but this is the second time in this lesson that Jesus is really saying, like, hey, you really need to work on your forgiveness aspect. And I think that's true then in that day, but it's certainly true for us today. I think the condition is, hey, we need to forgive, and then you will be forgiven. We see the mindset there in Matthew chapter 18 of how that mechanically should work, right? Where you're supposed to go to them. If that doesn't work, take one or two other people, go to them again. If that doesn't work, tell it to a church. But it's not like, all right, I'm done. I've tried. Jesus says that this isn't something that should be just kind of quickly thought through, but in this kind of up to 77 times, right? This kind of hyperbolic view of forgiveness. It's do everything you can do to forgive those other people that maybe you have something against. I think then the Colossians passage there is put on there as God's chosen ones, holy and beloved, compassionate hearts, kindness, humility, meekness, and patience, right? This mindset of like, this is how you approach this, with compassion and with kindness, with humbleness, with meekness and patience. And then verse 13 is bearing with one another, and if anyone has a complaint against another, forgiving each other as the Lord has forgiven you, so you also must forgive. This perspective of forgiveness needs to be, look what God has done for me. Well, it looks like let's just put this all up. My animations were kind of a little misordered there. And the final one here this morning is we think about when you fast. Again, Jesus is saying this is something that was part of the audience's normal life. This was something that they did. And many of the Pharisees would fast twice a week. In fact, they chose the days that they fasted on the market days, so when all the food comes into the town, they're like, this is the day I'm going to show that I'm fasting. We see that fasting was a part of Scripture, right? We see the reasons behind them. That David, in his sorrow for the young child with Bathsheba that was what was going to die, we see that he is fasting until the time that the child dies, and then he gets up and moves on. We see this idea of penitence or repentant sorrow in Nehemiah. The Israelites, they've come back, they realize that, like, hey, we've done all these things, we've married these wives, we've done all the things we should not have done. We're going to hit a reset button. And one of the elements there is truly fasting. We see Saul, right, on the way to Damascus, gets confronted with where he is in his life, and it's like his life was completely upside down. And we see in this, he didn't eat for a matter of 3 days. We see also there's this idea of when there are people petitioning the Lord, right? Daniel is asking for God's guidance. We see the Antioch leaders, before they send Paul and Silas out, then they would fast and make sure that they were kind of rededicating themselves. This is really the only time that the children of Israel were commanded to fast was really one time per year as a Day of Atonement. So I think, what is now? Should we fast? That's kind of the question, and we have 3 minutes to go. So, show of hand. No. I think it's interesting. The time, probably there is opportunity on how we should fast. But the reason should be the same as what we see in Scripture. Are there times where I have extreme sorrow, and I think there are probably times in my life when I just didn't eat. It wasn't necessarily I'm fasting, but it is a way to then kind of focus our thoughts, efforts, and desires on God, not on when can I get a Chick-fil-A sandwich. I think that's the key here. What things in my life am I so sorrowful for? I think, what does that look like in our lives? Are there times where I need to really dedicate myself to be thinking about key decisions? Are there big decisions that are coming up in your lives that you really want to focus your efforts on? How might we then do those things in our life? What Jesus is really calling out is, hey, when you do this, don't put ashes and make your face all messed up. Like, when we're doing these things, our motive should not be, guess who can see how righteous I look. It should be kind of this way of kind of using this idea of fasting, this pausing of consuming things in our lives to focus our minds spiritually. It can help us deepen our focus. But what Jesus is saying is, like, this should be voluntary. It should be done with humility and in the right heart. So I think in all three of these aspects, Jesus is calling us to what is kind of this level of devotion, right? All three of these things, in giving, in praying, and in fasting, there's a level of devotion that is kind of being expressed in that. But what Jesus is saying is, like, this needs to be authentic. This needs to be something that is not for this public performance, but it should be our heartfelt worship towards God. He calls out over and over again, right? Our true reward is from God, not from those around us. And this idea, Jesus continues in this sermon to say, be different, right? Our righteousness should be greater. It should have an inward focus. Our love has to be deeper, right? Even your enemies. And our actions need better motives. That's what he's focusing on here, right? What we do needs to be with the motivation of serving God, not serving ourselves. We need to be sincere and thoughtful. We should be trying to glorify God, not glorifying ourselves. The next lesson is really going to focus on our purposeful idea of our trust in God. right? We're going to look at the provision that he is for us and the purposeful things that he's put in our lives, and we trust in him for our eternal rewards. Thanks, everybody.